You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Varcoe, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. It's been a while. Thanks for chiming in, and for our subscribers, obviously, and regular listeners. Good to see you again. But also for those who are chiming in for the first time, welcome on board. It's been a while, and I do apologise for that. It's been a pretty frenetic last couple of months, and we've seen a lot of things happening in international travel, international conferences, a lot of work being done on that space. And we may talk into that at some point during the podcast and address those issues, or we'll talk into that space. Really exciting times, but also, some pretty big battles in place as well. But on to today's guest, very important. Today's very special guest has got game, and I mean serious game. I could table his certifications and his qualifications, but that will not even come close to giving you some insight into the depth and breadth of this walking library and the insights and experiences that he does have. Warwick has run AOD rehabilitation facilities, his own counselling practice, and is currently Vice President of the International Substance Abuse and Addiction Coalition and the Director of the Asian region for 15 years. He is sought after around the world, not only for his knowledge and wisdom, but the incredible capacity to empower and equip people from multiple demographics and geographies. I think the term artist is more appropriate than clinician. Yep, I'm winding this guy right up. I'm talking up a big game for a good reason. Warwick Murphy, welcome to the Unnecessary Harm podcast, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Shane. It's always good when somebody introduces you. Your head grows a little bit bigger and you feel really good about yourself.
Well, for at least a short period of time, then we'll see what happens as we move forward. That could all unravel, my friend. But yeah, look, good to have you on board, mate. And it's been a while, and look, thanks for taking the time. I know there's a lot going on in your world, professionally and personally. And so thanks for doing this. It's a really important interview because I want to sort of mine your experience. Obviously, in the short time we have, we could be here for an hour, but we'll see how we go. But I want to mine as much as we can of your experience in that short window, because there's a lot going on in our culture at the moment, and we live in this now only immediacy kind of space, and it creates this fish tank environment. And most players in the fish tank don't know they're in the fish tank until someone sort of lifts them out of that space, and you go, oh, heck, look at that. They look back into that tiny arena that they thought was vast and knowledgeable, and they realise that this isn't. So part of that is kind of trying to get people out of that myopia, try and draw them out. And obviously substance use is part of that picture, but there's more going on here than just substance use. And we want to sort of try and, again, like I said, mine some of that experience and wisdom that you have. To kick us off, so for starters, how long, just for the sake of those in our audience who don't know you, which will be the majority of them, I don't doubt, although some people that are in the sector will know you well and chime in on this straight away, so that's great. But how long have you been working in the human recovery, renewal and recalibration space, and where did it kind of all begin for you, mate?
It's easier to tell you the figure on that. It's 50 years now.
Wow.
I remember the figure because it's our 50th wedding anniversary later this year. So
congratulations.
Since we got married, or not long after we got married, actually, we started working with, they weren't street kids. We were down in a little town in Wales in Great Britain. And while the rest of our team that we were with were working with local churches and various other people, we found ourselves connecting with a lot of the kids who were just roaming the streets there. It was just a little town. They weren't big crims or anything like that. It was all small time stuff, stealing from the local tobacco shop and all that sort of rubbish. But we found ourselves having them around our house every night, and just that connection happened. And then I guess it just grew from there. Somewhere along the way, we discovered we keep meeting people like that. And over the years, if you like, I'm not into terminology necessarily, but the depth of dysfunction in the lives of the people we were meeting just kept getting deeper. So I'm a Christian, and I would say, God just gently led us down this road, rather than throwing us right in the deep end. He gave us a bit of a taste to start with. We found that we connected, both my wife and I, and have continued down that road ever since. Yeah. It really is horses for courses. People have said to us over the years, I don't know how you work with these people, and I look at some of these people. In fact, one guy said to me, he's pastoring a church. He said, I don't know how you do that. And I said, well, I don't know how you do what you do either. So.
Well, it's interesting. Let's step back into that kind of initial contact and that sort of organic connection that sort of burgeoned and developed. And like, again, you didn't go in with correct me if I'm wrong on this, Warwick, but you didn't go in with a predetermined playbook with a clear script of, well-rehearsed, protective factors, evidence-based practices, launched in and put this overlay on these dysfunctional kids who are going to try and help them not be dysfunctional. It seems to me it was, again, well, you talk about, the divine promptings, but on an organic sort of human level, what did you find sort of, I think the word organic is probably best. What did you find easy about it? Like, obviously it was not, easy is the wrong word. Natural, perhaps a better word. It just happened for you. So what were some of the things that you noticed, these kids are connecting? And is there any points where you went, wow, that was important. Oh, I didn't think that was going to be an issue. And any of those things kind of come to mind?
I think the thing that I keep going back to when I do think about it is, people kind of laugh at me when I say this, but the people we work with, the addicts, the whoever, the street people, I always find them quite honest, in that they're very honest about what they think about you, and they'll very quickly tell you whether you're talking a load of crap or whether you're not. Whereas the rest of us in the society, we don't get that honest with each other. We're all very nice to each other or not. Whereas these sort of people, you very quickly pick up. They very quickly pick up. They will tell you if they think it's a load of bullshit. And I really like that. I much prefer. That's probably one of the reasons I like you, Shane. There's an honesty. There's an openness there.
Appreciate that.
I don't like playing the games, that people play. That we feel we have to play.
Yeah. And young people and obviously people that are perhaps and I hate using demographic labels, but for the sake of brevity in our podcast, and apologies to listeners that might be scratched by this, I certainly don't want to do it, but they're sort of the lower socioeconomic, undereducated kind of folk. It's not about being simple. Sometimes it's about being, as you said, uncluttered by societal expectations. And I don't mean, certainly behavioural ones that cause disruption, but just the polite niceties and the Facebook images that we present, the social media images, we put our best foot forward in those marketplaces. But when we're down and dirty in the real world and things just aren't working for us and we don't have the words to use, we just call it as it is. And the WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, call it as it is. When that's done authentically and from a genuine heart, it's workable. When it's done as some sort of gimmick to be crass and vulgar, it's like, get over yourself, whatever, dude. But yeah, I think that's interesting. I've found that as well in my years working in the arena of young people, and that's been 40 years like yourself, not as long as you, Warwick, but you're working with some, and the narratives don't really change a lot. The environmental influences can be a little different and a little bit more ferocious, but really the things are the same. But look, I think that's important. And one thing about dealing with obviously substance using, those entrenched in substance use, caught dependency, caught in the tyranny of addiction, whatever other kind of capture that they're in. There's both a rawness and a transparency and honesty, but at the same time an incredible capacity to craft images, and we won't go into that right now. But we can We know that story. Well, we may bump into that a bit later on. We'll get to that rate. So, okay, yeah, that's good. But that started in Wales, and obviously your early days were formative days in this space, I suppose, in the UK. Would that be a fair assumption?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm just trying to think back. Actually, I had a really critical thing. I went to England with a team, a Christian team from a church. We went over. There's a whole story behind it. I'm not going to go into here, but we were up in the Midlands, and there was a guy called Vic Ramsey. Vic ran a place called the Red House, which was a drug rehab up in the Midlands, and we went to do some work with him. Part of that involved every Friday night, over about 3 months, this team of Australians who were there all travelled down to London on a Friday night, Friday afternoon, and spent hours around the West End of London. So we were, again, confronted with, I've never seen anything like it again, really. Just the drug use, we're right into that whole hippie thing.
Right,
and so
okay. It's that era, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, drugs were all over the place. Cults were everywhere. There was just amazing stuff going on. But in Piccadilly Circus, or underneath Piccadilly Circus, where the tube station is, it's a circle. You walk around this big circle to get to different station platforms and all. But it was almost like a stopwatch. At around, I think it was about 2:30 every afternoon, and then again a bit later in the evening, the drug dealers would come, and the drug users they knew, and so they would all just walk down there. Deals were done on the concourse there. People would head into the local public toilets that were down there, shoot up in there, etc. Health and safety were not an issue, of course. No. But I remember, I've never forgotten it. I walked down there one night, and there was a girl. She was probably 15 or 16. She had just used, and she was literally leaning against the wall, sliding down the wall in a drug-induced stupor, and ended up collapsed on the passed out on the footpath there. And we went over to her, and what can we do? And she's out cold, so we called the ambulance, and the ambulance came surprisingly at that time. And the ambulance guy, he just seemed so cold to me. He just looked at her and he said, "Well, what do you want us to do?" And I said, "She's overdosed or something." I said, "Who knows?" I would have suggested you take her to the hospital or something. He said, "Well, we can do that." He said, "And we will do that." He said, "But they'll take her up there. They will dose her up with some medication." He said, "And she will be back here again within the hour."
Wow.
And it was that. But this is a guy who sees this every day.
Oh, of course. I understand. It's easy to judge the coldness, but it's a matter of survival when you're confronted with that every hour.
But I thought about it later, and it was not that many. Wasn't probably 12 months since I had used anything, and here was this girl collapsing on the footpath. She's 15 or 16, whole life in front of her, or not. And I just thought, my goodness, a few choices of mine, that could have been me.
Yeah.
And it's something I've never forgotten. It impacted me heavily, still does.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like, I just got, the others down in Wales later on was the soft option. This was like in your face. Here it is. This is what's happening. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
I could have walked away. We could have gone somewhere else. But you're just confronted with this, and you can't walk away. You've got to respond. You've got to, and a lot of people, and I'm not trying to judge people here. I remember my mother, first time she went to India was, she walked out of the hotel and walked straight back in again.
Right.
Confronted with this.
Yes.
Which you'll only find in India, this mind-boggling thing. and she just couldn't cope and walk back into the hotel. And I think a lot of us do that. We see the homeless people on the street, we see all that sort of stuff, and what can I do?
Yeah.
I mean, that was really that really hit me. And then it went on to there. We ended up down in Wales some months later, and that just opened that door again. And I found, I mean, we were a Christian group. We're working with a church down in Wales, and these kids that we were dealing with just didn't. I said to them one day, "Do you want to come down to the church with us? We've got some do on." No, we don't want to go there. They don't like us.
Okay.
And immediately I started to hear this, hang on, that should be the place that does accept you. So it's just gone on, and I guess through life we've had that interaction with a lot of churches, a lot of Christian organisations and stuff, and there's some really good stuff that goes on, but there's a whole miscommunication there as well.
Well, we'll talk about that later on. It's interesting. I'm noticing globally, because we work globally, and there's a number of different organisations, particularly the UK. Up in Scotland, there's some of the things that are getting traction. Some of the programs or projects or actions that are actually getting traction are coming out of churches. It's fascinating to watch that, and obviously for those in the audience who are in that space and those who aren't. I mean, it's about compassion. It's about community. And it's interesting that when you look at the CHIME model for mental health and the CHIME model, the CHIME for recovery, it's you talk about community, you talk about meaning, we talk about all those factors that are in there, and the church has historically been that space. And again, for different reasons, it migrates into a place that's perhaps not as healthy in that context of care and community well-being factors. But look, it is confronting for a lot of people, particularly if they're in a bubble, and it's okay to be in a bubble, but it's not okay to get outside your bubble and jump back in and go, I don't want to know. That's not okay. But your work obviously developed and grew, and you've worked cross-culturally. And just before I jump down this particular space, the substances I'm assuming were opioids, heroin mainly, in that initial days for you back in the late 60s, early 70s, Warwick, would that be fair?
Yeah. Heroin was the main drug. Heroin and alcohol were the two main drugs. Cannabis was becoming. It was interesting looking back now. Cannabis was. Some people were using. Some people weren't sure about it. They weren't. It was like, oh, am I going to become a hippie or something if I smoke this? I mean, it was just. It was just, whereas today it's just seen as another thing that you do, and everybody sees it to people.
We won't go into the cannabis space today, but that's a rabbit hole I'll go down and won't come out of. But you do work globally, mate, and across many cultures. I know that for a fact, and I've seen your work and engage with a lot of clients that you work with globally. What are some of the consistent themes you've seen around substance use uptake? And what are some of the cultural helps and hindrances that you've seen to recovery? So, does that make sense? What are some of the themes?
It does. I remember speaking to my friend Jackie Pullinger some years ago now. So Jackie's worked for those who don't know, Jackie's worked in Hong Kong for over 50 years. Has an amazing work there with drug users and stuff.
Outstanding.
And I asked her, I was talking to her about addictions and stuff once, and she's an absolute believer that it's driven by poverty. And when I look at, we lived in Asia for 5 years, we're doing some work in Africa these days. That's a common factor, the poverty. But it's not just the lack of money, it's because that doesn't mean to say that if you've got no money, you're going to go and use drugs. That doesn't correlate. But the lack of ability to better yourself or to provide for your family or whatever, that speaks in here, speaks inside yourself.
Okay.
It tells you that you can't achieve, you can't do, you can't change. And so you revert to something else. This is I see this everywhere. And so again, that's why it works in right across socioeconomic situations. So whether it's poverty or whether it's the guy who lives up in the big house up on the hill and he's grown up in that situation, if he's not fed in here, then he's not happy. He's not, and so you get the big footballers getting paid a small fortune. But every year here in Melbourne, anyway, you know, there's going to be stories about footballers and drugs and all the rest of it on the newspaper through the year. And lots of people go, why do they do that? It's exactly the same reason about the guy who's got no money. It's in here.
So poverty of, I mean, you use the term poverty of spirit. It's an interesting term, and it has different origins. But yeah, I think that is a key driver. We do a lot of drug ed over the years, and we've developed our own sort of labelling system, for want of a better word, but just categories of engagement. And of course, the recalcitrant, we call recalcitrant hedonism. That's like I'm just going to party hard until I die. And that's Yahoo and those kind of animals. Let's call them the party animals. Yeah, look, they're there, and that's real, and they got the means to do it, and they do it, and then, of course, relational poverty is a big one that we see, and that's of course, relentless pain, which we can talk about later on in the trauma space, but relational poverty of spirit. But the big one which I think ties into what you're saying, is what we call residing absurdity. Is this sense of it? If I can't make sense of it, I'm just going to party hard or obliterate myself. Or if I cannot, as you said, social mobility dynamic, and I can't transcend where I am. And that's interesting when you use that term transcend, because then the drug space offers you a counterfeit. The term high, getting high, it relates to that transcendence. It's another plane that doesn't meet the need that you're craving. It doesn't meet the need in any way other than change for a season, a very short season, the way you feel. And then you're back into that space. But so that's interesting that is common across cultures.
Oh, absolutely.
And I like the fact you said just because you don't have money doesn't mean you're going to become a drug user. And we see a lot in a lot of places, because poverty in and of itself is not the driver, but poverty disconnected from a capacity to make a difference or to find meaning, and that does create its own problem, maelstrom. So that's interesting. So what are some of the helps and hindrances you found in cultures when, like, for example, you said Asia, Africa, the Western culture, Western first world spaces. What are some of the helps and hindrances to help people exit the drug space?
Just helps in working with people with addiction issues is getting the family engaged. And it varies. All over the place it varies. Whether families, first of all, want to get involved, or whether they've been burnt so much by the behaviour of this person that they've given up. And I'm not trying to judge them. I mean, that's living with some of these people.
I understand that from a personal experience, my friend. Yeah.
Having lived in a drug rehab and worked in it, some of the people just drive you up the wall.
Correct.
So for families, there's a lot of trauma that goes with that.
Yeah.
But if you can get the family engaged, and particularly in places like Asia and Africa, family is so important, because you can bring shame to your family, and that is just such a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I've just, I've seen families send their, one story, great story actually, of a guy who was HIV positive. They sent him away to another city because of the embarrassment and the shame that he brought to their family. He actually got healed some years later.
Wow.
He's become a big, this is in Vietnam. He's a big name in the recovery field over there.
Wow.
He's now married, he's got kids, fantastic story. But if the family's engaged and they start to accept these people, and it's not an easy thing, it's not an overnight thing, because again, the addict quite often has no idea the damage they've done to the family.
Yeah, the awareness is not there, is it?
No, I spoke to a guy in a rehab in Pakistan years ago. He'd been in the rehab 6 months, and his family was still very doubtful about him. And he said to me, he said, "So when is it going to change?" He said, "I've been here 6 months." He said, and I'm changing, and but they won't. And I said, "How long have you been using?" He said,
Yeah, wow.
"About 10 years." I said, "You've had 10 years to train your family not to trust you."
Yeah, yeah.
Looked at
Perfect.
it a minute and go, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that."
Yeah, yeah. There's an awakening moment.
So, but the family wanted to work with him, but the addict needs to understand you've done some damage there. This
Yeah,
is not going to change overnight. They want you, they love you, they care for you, but they're also very wary of you.
yeah,
But if you can get them involved, it makes a difference. It makes because usually it's not just the family that gets involved. It's their, particularly in Africa, it's their village, it's their
yeah,
people. They all get involved at that level. Um, so those things, those relationships, because that's where we, rightly or wrongly, that's where we gain our self-worth is through those close relationships, and trying to restore that, trying to work through those things is just, yeah,
yeah.
fantastic.
Rebuilding bridges, yeah, and especially bridges that have been burned to the ground. It's like
Yeah.
it's that's a lot of work, and of course, as you've indicated, it is. And having been in that experience myself, my brother passed away last year. Drugs finally got him in the end. It wasn't an overdose or any,
Yeah.
the poisoning, or it just ruined his body. And at the age of 61, his body stopped unexpectedly, and but there was decline. But yeah, the damage done and the love hate relationship with particularly my mum and dad, who just invested so much love and care. And you get the false starts that happen 100 times, and I'm changed, and they come back and they're abused and ripped off and lied to and stolen from, and then resources just burnt, and then they come back crying and with compassion, which is genuine in their space.
Yep.
But their capacity to shift still hasn't been learnt, because there's some things they won't surrender. But anyway, we won't go down that way. But yet it's hard, and being the oldest sibling, for me, one of the things that was difficult, what was helpful for me, was I love my brother, I cared for him, but I did not have that same as I do with my own children. I get, being a parent and a grandparent, it's there's a level of investment and relationship that really muddies the water when you want to engage with real transformative relational love. And mums and dads, they struggle with it. So being the oldest sibling, I was able to step in and make some of the choices, and tougher choices, that they couldn't make. Not they were unwilling to make, they just couldn't pull the trigger on it. And when I did it, I was the bad guy. But in the end of the day, I was the guy that he looked up to. I was the guy he listened to, because the boundaries were set and they weren't going to move. They just weren't going to move. Here's a doorway through the boundary, my friend. This is the way you get through the boundary, through the door. You want to climb over, it's going to be problematic. You want to knock it down, you're going to hurt yourself. That's all that's going to happen here. So again, these are the journeys that I understand, and people, those out there listening to this who perhaps are in this situation, and it really is tough, guys. Warwick and I can both speak to the significant depth of how difficult this is, and we're not dismissing that. We're not saying it, just set these things up and it'll be fine. It takes a long time. So, be encouraged. Families matters, and the process of engagement, boundary setting, loving, caring, supporting, not supporting when the situation is important. So no, I'm not going to support that. That's important. So look, outside of trauma, obviously trauma is a big one. And I remember speaking to you years ago when you're running your practice, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you talked about the various vehicles of invitations for uptake that were there. And of course, there's, as we said, hedonism, there's curiosity, there's fun, party, whatever. But you were talking about particularly heroin or opioid users, that the vast majority, I think, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, Warwick, you said about 90% of your female clients were sexually abused. and who owned up to it, and 50% of you male. And you said, look, I think it's actually more, but men don't own up to sexual abuse easily. Is that still without oversimplifying it, because there's a lot of nuances here? Is that still a key element of that kind of trauma in substance use engagement?
It's particularly for women. I think it's still a huge issue. How addiction works with men and women does differ. There are different players within that. But yeah, those figures. We were working in London, so we're back in the late 70s at this point. We were doing a lot of outreach in the Earls Court area, which was, don't know whether it still is, but back then of a night time it was kind of like, it was like King's Cross or St Kilda or whatever it was.
Yeah.
One of the girls on the team was working with the prostitutes the sex workers on the street there. I tended to work with the users, the drug users and alcoholics and stuff, street people. Ruth had done a lot of studies. She was a lot more detailed than me. I tend to be a bigger picture thing. She was much more detailed. She's still working with these women today. It's just amazing.
Wonderful.
But she said to me, we talked a lot about why women get involved in it, what was involved, and all the rest of it. And there's a lot of illogical thinking that goes with that scene. But she said the girls that she was working with, she said at that point, 90% were sexually abused, either usually by somebody close to them in the family. It could be a step, or there could be some guy.
It's the trust as well as the abuse, isn't it? Yeah.
We started to look at the guys we were working with in the rehab, and getting guys to admit to it. That's a big one. Although I think today, I think people are a lot more open about it, which is great.
Yeah, they are. For sure.
But back then they weren't.
No.
Our figures were much lower, but I would have said that most of the guys were not being totally honest with us about it. It's a big driver, and sadly today our world is
not better. It's not better.
Yeah, I think it's sicker. I think it's sicker.
Absolutely.
No, I mean we're on the news. There's what's his name, P Diddy or whatever his name is in the States. To him, this was quite normal. That sort of throwing those parties. A few years ago we had the Prime Minister of Italy, renowned for his what were they bunga parties?
Boingo, I think they were.
Yeah. We've seen various presidents in the United States
who remain nameless.
Yeah. Well, there's three that quickly come to mind.
Yeah, correct.
All that. And the sexual revolution that people talk about has made this seem like, this is what you should do. You should accept this sort of stuff. We've got ads on the telly here today about how do you talk about consent? And I'm thinking,
wow.
Why are governments involved in this? Well, this is something you should learn at home. This is, but we've normalised this sort of sexualized behaviour. So now whether somebody considers it sexual abuse, lots of people would think, oh no, I just gave myself to it.
Correct.
And again, it's like the drug. It doesn't answer what they want it to answer. It's a short-term hit.
Yeah.
And from what I've read of particular sexual predators, it grows. The abuse grows from one thing, gets worse, and worse.
And substance use becomes an integral part of that predatory behaviour. And even we've got indications of certain curricula in our schools now where they talk about, I'm not going to name the curriculum, but it's concerning that they talk about, with year 8 kids, not just about the biology of sex, but how to enjoy orgasmic sex as if this was a normal part of their life. And more importantly, there's one line that says, I believe in part of the curriculum saying, and if you're having difficulty with this, drugs can help. Now, this is year 8. I mean, and the digital era that we're living in, which is quite scary. I mean, obviously the digital era now, where pornography is, when I was growing up, it was hard to get hold. You could get hold of it, but you had to buy it, and it was in hard copy and form. But now, it's and it's not just nudity and sex. It's barbarity. It is barbarity. And young women, particularly, being groomed for this space and told this is normal, and so they again, you said give themselves to it, but it's actually abuse that they're surrendering to. Well, and young boys as well, and we're seeing that as well. And young men are being, they talk about this is where toxic masculinity it does its biggest damage.
We just had a situation here in Melbourne that's running at the moment, where this queer artist, did this huge great mural on the side of a building somewhere here in Melbourne of a woman totally bound up, and according to the artist and various other people, this is a classic piece of art. Thankfully, some graffiti artist has come along and covered it up now, but they were presenting this as this is normal, this is okay, this is and this woman that they'd painted was bound up in hands and feet and
it's horrendous.
It was. I'm thinking, how can the local neighbourhood accept that this is somewhat normal?
Yeah. Well, and then this is where the drug space is really concerning for us, because again, we're watching this happen. We're talking about correlate and causal, and I think they're both. I think, and the World Social Report was just released recently. We've done a bit of a dive into it and a summarising of it. But they've actually, for the first time in a long time, said substance use is the biggest social concern, because people are disinformation, distrust, poverty, increasing, understanding of things. People don't, misunderstanding of things. People don't have a framework in which to navigate, and as a result, they get easily, as you mentioned before, in your own sort of space earlier on, they get lost. Yeah. And when you're lost, you're looking for a comfort, and then you step into places you shouldn't step into, drugs, sexuality, and these things give you that instant relief of distress or anxiety, but then only multiply it moving forward. And look, with the trauma thing, I think the trauma-informed therapies become, quite an issue at the moment, in not a bad way, a positive way. That when you're engaging with people for counselling, and particularly with substance use, understanding trauma, understanding what it looks like, not being dismissive of certain practices, but this is one of the things that is creating that dismissiveness. I mean, what is trauma now? I mean, now we got one end of the spectrum, whereas someone called me a name, that's trauma, and my life falls apart. Yeah. And I'm not being dismissive of that, but that just shows the fragility of and the lack of resilience that's in play, which should be fundamentally in place. I mean, no one likes to be called names, but the reality is a disagreement can cause trauma. So that's what's, I think, not helping the cause. But then the other side of the coin, as you mentioned before, is this is normal. This kind of abusive sexual behaviour, drug use that leads me into vulnerable and unsafe places is now becoming normal. And then when it's all found out, when it's undone, then all the trauma starts to appear. It's always there, but it's been let out, like Epstein and his sociopaths, and that's the kindest word I can get for those guys, and their elites that play in this space. And these kind of things are celebrated. And even the unwitting, the useful idiots, so it wasn't Stalin who said that, it was one of his cronies, the useful idiots that go along with this and try and make it sound like it's sophisticated and progressive, and it's not. Yeah. And particularly for young people and children that are just undone by this. And it's interesting, the 7 ACEs that are recognised as adverse childhood experiences that are globally recognised now, and the three genres, dysfunction, neglect, and abuse. And one of those in those 7 sort of allocations, substance use, and the substance use contributes to the other 6 areas, either correlate or causal. It's staggering that this is in the marketplace as a clear indicator to develop protective behaviours, yet the drug policy activists ignore it. The rights of children's being pushed aside because I want to get off. The politician, the accountant, the lawyer, whoever wants to do his lines of coke to keep going. I want to do that with impunity, Don't give a damn about the outcome and the other end of the coin. That's not my problem. Yeah, sure, kids shouldn't use drugs, but not my problem. And this is kind of the society we're now living in, where that kind of it's abominable behaviour that is now passed off as okay. And of course, when you're stoned off your face and on a stimulant, it's like who gives a rip, you know? And when you want to have sex with someone, it becomes a thing. I'm just doing the thing with the thing. I'm doing the chick, or I'm doing the guy, or I'm doing whatever. And literally, that's where we become. And substance use just amplifies that usury, that level of abuse, and of course there are casualties, and they're mounting.
It's a self-harm as well.
Of course it is.
You know, we talk about abuse of the other person, but all of this that you just described is a self-abuse. It's something inside that you're trying to find an answer for. You're trying to find something that makes you valuable, and so you emulate your heroes, your sporting heroes, or whoever.
Yeah.
But you're never going to reach that by doing that. It's yeah.
I think, and again, the self-harm. This is an interesting injection there. The self-harm dynamic only creates an effigy of a diminished effigy of who you are, and that seeks out its own need to self-medicate again on another level. And it's a downward spiral, and it's fascinating and disturbing to watch. And one of the things that I think today I wanted to come out of in the journey, because your experience across many platforms and many cultures is really important, but seeing what is happening, what is unravelling, and that's becoming pretty obvious to anybody who cares to look. For those who don't care to look, you know, there's no talking to them anyway. They're in that deep dive of despair or self-indulgence or narcissism that, you know, only a sledgehammer is going to shift them out of, and we don't have the capacity to apply that. But when it comes to recovery, besides the family issue, which you've articulated quite well, and I think very important, and I think listeners hopefully will grasp that and wrestle with that in their own space. I mean, it's a difficult one. But what are the indispensable tools have you found consistent in helping people recover, exit drug use successfly?
I think there's two things. I mean, there's a lot of things, but there's two that jump to mind straight away. One is actually trying to help people get their focus out of themselves and look externally. And if you look at it's one of the key points of the 12-step program that Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, all these people use.
Sure.
Whilst dealing with whatever's gone on in their life and their history, the last few steps of the 12-step program are to get out of yourself and go out and start to deal with some other people, start to help some other people. And so if you go to 12-step meetings, you will find a sponsor there if you want to work through it. And so that they're actually an alcoholic themselves, they would call themselves, but they're starting to focus outside of themselves.
Yeah.
How can I help this person?
Beautiful.
Because addiction is an incredibly self-centered behaviour.
Yeah.
It's probably the most self-centered behaviour I know, in that it's all about you, it's about me feeling good, it's always about me.
Correct.
I could talk on that for a while, but
Yep.
getting people to start to focus out there, and that not only just to focus out there, but to understand I can actually do something to assist somebody else.
Brilliant.
It's not just me focusing out there. It's about I can actually assist this other person, and I can actually understand something of what they're going through. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And when we reach out for somebody else, it feels nice in here. There's no doubt about that. That's a nice little buzz that we get. That factor on it, to me, is just a huge, great plus in recovery, because it feeds into the other thing, and that is helping someone understand that they are valuable.
Yeah.
You know, the world, the classic image of the alcoholic in the gutter or the addict shooting up on the street that we often see on the news and stuff. That person has no value. They think they've got no value.
Yeah.
We all look at them and think they've got no value. Helping those people understand that you actually do have value.
Yeah.
Some of the guys I dealt with a guy in St Kilda here years ago. He was a chronic alcoholic, living under the bushes down in St Kilda somewhere. And I got talking to him one night in a long conversation. Turns out he was a trained dentist.
Wow.
And through his drinking, well, there were triggers in his life that just started this downward spiral. He lost his family, he'd lost his profession, he'd lost everything. But he was no fool.
Yeah.
He was, and there are people out there, we look at them and we think they've got no value. They think they've got no value.
Yeah.
If we can help them to start to understand, you do have value. Where you get that value from that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
That road, but
that's another conversation for another day. But yeah,
it is, but helping them understand, I can get into this, and so a lot of the rehabs that I've worked with over the years, there's one that comes to mind, a group called Battelle. They are a large community. Everybody in the community, pretty much, maybe 99% of the people in the community are former users. And they run businesses and all sorts of things to support the rehab recovery work. But when somebody goes there, an addict goes there, they get linked up with another person straight away.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And you've got this buddy sort of thing going on. But they become part of that community. They're not just seen as, oh, you're the new addict.
Yeah.
You're a new part of our community.
Yep.
And the language that they use and all that sort of stuff is really important. And their voice has value. And they can step into conversations and having a point of view.
Yeah, beautiful.
The guy on the gutter in the street, he's got no point of view. Nobody wants to hear him. Nobody wants to give him anything. Governments want to keep him quiet over there, all this sort of stuff. But these recovery programs that we're seeing today, that being able to build into a group of people who are like me, because they've all been there, but they're living something different, and they're accepting me for who I am. They're listening to what I got to say. That just speaks volumes to people.
It does.
It absolutely, and even on a one-on-one thing, in a counselling process for a one-on-one situation, that is a key thing. I've sat with addicts across the room, and it's a bit like a little game. If you understand the rules, you understand, because the addict will want to control the space.
Yep. Always.
And
got to protect the space.
I'm quite happy to let them sit there and think they're controlling the space for a couple of sessions.
Yeah.
But in giving them that space, that also says to them, oh, this guy's given me some credence. I'll listen to him the next time I come.
Correct.
So that sense of value is important, but the sense of actually getting out there and helping somebody else are two things that are just mega.
Yeah, well, shifting from casualty, to use a cliche, to contributor is a matter of engaging what you are. And value is ascribed. I'll put that on the table. Not earned, it's ascribed. We get that from outside ourselves. Yeah. And respect, you do have to earn respect. That's a journey of engagement, involvement. I think that's a valuable insight that we need to put on the table today as well. But I think it's the lived experience and earned resiliency model, which is now currently being hijacked by certain actors in the arena. We won't go there today. But the genuine lived experience of those exiting substance use, it's not just about, I use drugs, here's how you use it safer or better or try and stay alive, all that kind of stuff. Not saying that lacks value, but it is not the agenda of lived experience and earned resiliency. It is, what have I learned in backtracking? And because we now know the overlay with recovery principles and prevention priorities are almost, they're different names, but they're the same journey. And we're sort of walking back out. And what you do is help people walk back out through prevention models to recovery. And then they become carriers, not just of a lesson and not just of an idea, but as you said, they can contribute on different levels. And the experience of the substance use isn't the key central issue. It's, you know what, I learned value, that I was valuable. I learned what I did to sabotage my value. I learned what I did to ruin relationships and how I can now better develop those. So it's about equipping that person and being equipped, and that's when they start adding value, because and all of a sudden it's like they're not celebrating their past errors, they're harnessing the hard-won lessons to make a difference, to transform their community. And that's what we want to see happen. That's what we're party to on global levels. But yeah, so mate, I just got to wind up. We're hitting towards the hour. But look, thank you for today. And it's been a long time coming. We've had a few cracks at this, but for various health and well-being. No, mate. You've got a lot going on in your world. But I just wanted to again say to our listeners, this is a hard conversation. We're not glossing over it. We've spent 45 minutes talking about this. We've just scratched the surface. This is not the is-all and end-all of the recovery conversation and or community building and or value instilling. It is just a starting point, a primer. And we encourage you to really look at that. A lot of good resources out there. Warwick's mentioned a few of those. But again, real community, real relationships, surrender to authentic relationships and accountability. These are core issues. Warwick, to close us off, there's a question we ask most of our guests, and not all, but 95% of them. The fence or the ambulance? In your world, which is the priority? The fence or the ambulance?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? I think the fence is the most important. I tend to work in the ambulance, but the fence is the most important. And I think today we've got great holes in it. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. I think that's a fair answer, and part of what we're doing today is trying to plug those holes and put the ambulances out of business. And in the end of the day, that's what we want to do. Warwick Murphy, thank you so much for joining us today. And for listeners out there, thanks for joining us. Until next time, be safe, build resiliency, and add to your community in ways that they need you to. Bye.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm Podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.